So I would say it was I could only speak Urdu until preschool. And my first interaction really with understanding English or being acquainted with English was in preschool.
Okay.
I think that my identity as, one being Pakistani, American, Canadian, all of those things intermixed in one, I think I identify with my culture better because I can speak my native language. So at home, we try to speak exclusively in Urdu. My husband and I think that's a reason why we got married, is both of us felt that connection with our native tongue. And for both of us, that was really important that we could speak and understand the language. I am who I am. I think a lot of what it has to do with being able to speak that native tongue, especially when you travel back to Pakistan or India and you're visiting relatives that might not have that same language ability in English. It's really nice to be able to know that you have a connection with them and that you can understand them. I feel like if you can't communicate with your elders and your loved ones, then you've lost a lot of that ability to connect and love and have those emotions with family members. A lot. I think, and culture, I think, is entwined a little bit with religion too, and those aspects of being born and raised here. I think especially when you have parents that have been raised in a particular culture and then come over to another country, I think they try even harder to hold on to those values and those morals and that sense of community that they grew up with. So I think that my parents tried very hard for us to stay within those bounds and that they tried to raise us the way that they were raised, which I think was great. I mean, we learned a lot about our culture and our religion just from having those tight bonds. So that helped us to connect as parents, as a family, as a community in that respect. There were times, I will say, I think you do notice that you're different at times. You do feel like, not everyone understands who you are or where you're coming from, or, people will point out that, I remember feeling different in some respects too, because where I grew up in Canada, there weren't very many Indian, Pakistani kids at our school, and so we definitely stood out as a minority. And yes, sometimes you feel that pressure as a minority. Sure, there were times where you even faced racism or stereotypes about who you are and what you do. But I would say overall, I've had very good friends and a very positive influences in my life, and so it's been a good experience overall. I think that kind of speaks for who I am too. I think there's certain things that I definitely still relate better as as from that culture, being Pakistani or speaking Urdu, and then because I've been born and raised here, I think I can relate in a lot of respects to my Caucasian friends too, because our experiences have been so similar growing up here too, and so yeah. Okay.
So I actually spoke Punjabi first, even though I was born here in the States, in St. Louis, but before I can remember. So I think preschool I started learning English, and then I don't know exactly, but at some point it switched to where obviously English is my dominant language and now Punjabi is more effort. I understand pretty well. If people are speaking directly to me, I think I understand just about everything. If there's a conversation happening that I'm not a part of, it takes some effort, and the longer I'm there, the better it gets. Mm-hmm. And it takes a fair amount of effort for me to speak Punjabi at this point. It doesn't just roll off my tongue. Yeah. It takes effort to get into the to switch. Yeah, to switch, because at first I'm translating.
Yeah.
Sure. And then after a few minutes, then it starts to become. Then I'm just thinking that way. Mm-hmm. But it takes effort, and I didn't put in the effort. Yeah, at times. Yeah, absolutely.
So then
absolutely.
Did you...
But it wasn't because of language.
Okay, it wasn't?
Mm-mm.
So why was it?
More appearance, race. Yeah, race, name, things like that. Especially growing up in a suburban, predominantly white community. But I never had an accent, right? I've always spoken like an American person. I'd say if anything, sometimes I wish that I lived in a place with a larger Punjabi community. Mm-hmm. And St. Louis just isn't that. So if I lived in like Vancouver or London or something like that, I think then I might put more effort toward it, because there is more of a, there would be a larger community that I'm maybe missing something from.
I grew up speaking English and Taiwanese, which is a dialect of Chinese, and I know a little bit of Chinese, but yeah, my Taiwanese is slowly fading. So it's, when I was younger, my parents spoke Taiwanese to me, and I would speak Taiwanese to them back sometimes, and then it evolved into, they would speak Taiwanese to me and then I'd speak English back, but now it's turned into like English both ways. They did with my older siblings. My older siblings both went to Chinese school, but like, since I was kind of like just like the youngest child, I kind of just got away with not learning it as much. I think as my parents' English got better, like I didn't have to use that anymore. But it's tough sometimes when I have to talk to like my grandparents who are in Taiwan or like family relatives that are in Taiwan. Like that's when I get like the most practice speaking it. Yeah, I guess. I mean, if I didn't know Taiwanese, I'd feel like really disconnected from my culture. But at the same time, I don't think that's really been a huge factor. Not that involved. I like that I have like a different culture than like what I grew up, like a separate culture, but like I'm not that involved with it, I guess. Like I don't have that many like emotional attachments to it, I guess. But I think even like more and more now, like every time I go, it's like it's not hard for them to identify me as like American born. And like, I mean, I feel disconnected. I love going back because like the food, but at the same time, I can't take it for more than like 3 weeks at a time, just because it's such a different environment. It's not necessarily made fun of, but I think there is like a little bit of like microaggression. Like, I think Asians easily get stereotyped into like a certain type of person, or like people will make like innocent like Asian jokes, but they're actually like, they're not offensive, but they're like kind of like, is that like necessary? Like I grew up the same way that you did, so it's not that different.
I started out speaking Chinese from a young age, and then I started speaking English in like preschool. I basically only use Chinese when talking to my parents. I use English everywhere else. I think in Chinese. Actually, sometimes in general, like when I speak English, I'll think in Chinese first too. It's weird.
Oh, all the time?
Not always, but like sometimes it'll like come in randomly. So like I actually might like replace words in Chinese when I'm trying to speak English. And the other way around too, I think. Definitely a big priority. Like I started Chinese school, which is like a secondary school where you learn Chinese pretty early on, I think like 3rd grade. Because I spoke it at home, and then I learned it officially starting 3rd grade, and I didn't stop until 10th grade. I think for them it was essential primarily so that I could talk to my grandparents, because they only speak Chinese and Taiwanese, so if I didn't know how to speak one of the two, then I wouldn't be able to communicate with them. And the second reason is definitely like, for them is a priority to like pass on their cultural and cultural heritage, and they thought if I didn't speak Chinese it would be embarrassing. So my mom only exclusively speaks Chinese to me. She refuses to speak English so that I can remember how to speak, because she knows here at school I don't really speak any Chinese. So yeah, when she texts me, she only texts in Chinese. When she speaks to me on the phone, only in Chinese. So how have those visits been? I felt really out of place, to be honest.
Okay, and why is that?
I mean, I speak the language, but they can all tell that I'm not a native, and I think that causes a separation in like your identity when you're there. Like they consider you American, not like one of them. That's a good question. Probably, I don't know. If there was one like Chinese American, I would say that. I don't think I'm one of either.
English, my mom would always speak to me in Spanish when I was a kid. Oh, I'm fluent now. I spent most of my 20s studying Spanish, so in school, and I started back in high school because I really wanted to understand and grab it and speak it. when I'm at home with my mom, I usually speak Spanish. When I'm talking to my relatives on my mom's side, Spanish. With my friends, I have a friend who I always speak Spanish with. Everyone else is English. I think the more I have took on learning Spanish, the more closer I feel towards it. Sometimes, like when you grow up in one culture, you identify with that culture. But when you grow up with two, it's different. Because in some ways, I do identify a lot with American culture because I grew up here. But in some ways, I don't, and that kind of creates conflict in my mind sometimes. Like I don't want to say identity issues, but sometimes.
You're neither one.
Yeah. Like
yeah.
you don't completely fit in with this group, but you don't also completely fit in with this group.